Hi guys, welcome to Flowcast, a podcast by Flowout where we chat with successful entrepreneurs, freelancers, and other amazing professionals that are crushing it in their game. We are Flo and Peter, and we'll be your host on this audio journey. In this week's episode, we'll talk with Evan Stewart, the CEO and founder of Basewell. Evan's going to share his journey from founding and exiting a real estate business to building an online training platform for startups. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy the conversation.
Like Flo said in the intro, today we are here with one and only Evan Stewart. As the founder of Basewell, Evan spends most of his time designing, building, and investing products that help people live and work better. Evan, welcome to our podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Flo and Peter. Good to be here, and I know we're going to get into some good conversation today, so I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, likewise. So to kick it off, let's dive into your background a bit. How do you find a passion for building tools to help people work better? Since I know you've been in the real estate first, right?
That's right. Yeah, I started in real estate, but I've always been passionate about, regardless of what you do as a person, I believe that everyone should be equipped to do their best work within their environment. And a struggle that I actually found in real estate, which I'm sure we'll talk about later in the show, but a struggle that I had found was a lot of people were inhibited, not because they didn't want to do something, not because they weren't learning a new skill, but just because the tools in their environment and access to other opportunity was limited for whatever reason. And so I know this kind of a broad stroke, but I really got passionate about finding ways to eliminate friction and barriers for people to actually go and do more. And it sounds really complicated and kind of ethereal, but a lot of those friction and barriers are just in the basic tools that we use every day in order to actually accomplish what we're trying to set out and accomplish with our work. And so I kind of saw that trend early, and I didn't capitalize on it until later, now with Basewell, but it was something that was tugging at me for years. These like little thoughts like, that's really inefficient. I wonder if that could be made better. And now obviously that's what we're devoting our time to.
All right, cool. And yeah, let's dive a bit more into your past before we go in depth with that. Like, can you tell us more about like what did you actually do before, like in real estate or even before that, and where did you go to school?
Yeah, well, before that, I was actually in school, so I was at university, and I'd left the university. Something interesting happened when I was in school. I looked around my class, and it was like a melting pot. There were all different types of people, but more importantly, all different ages. And I saw people that were younger. I saw people that were older. There was a gentleman that was much younger than me, who was still technically in high school, but he was, taking advanced math classes in college. And then there was people who were older than me. And I looked around and I recognized that if I wanted to go back to school, I could always go back, because this person sitting next to me was obviously, in her 40s or 50s getting an advanced degree. So I looked around and I just had this burning desire. Like I wasn't even in a relationship, much less married, much less have children at the time. I didn't really have any connections or any money, but I did have time. And I did have a lot of fire. And so I kind of looked around one day and thought, I should go out and do the thing that I probably can't do later, which is to start trying to build a business. Because as life gets more complicated, as you get older, it gets harder and harder. Again, we talked about friction. That's something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. So I'll bring that up a lot. More friction gets added to your life, right? You want to do more, but maybe you've got other responsibilities that are more important. And so I left. And that's how I got started in real estate. Was I had a passion for the real estate industry. I still think it's fantastic. It's a great industry. I think that we as people need to be inspired and fascinated and motivated by our environment, because environments that fulfill us allow us to actually live happier, healthier, and more productive lives. And I still believe that to this day. At the time, I had recognized that, okay, I really like this idea of home and this idea of real property as an asset, a financial asset and a tool. And so I got my real estate license as an agent. And I just literally plopped down in the industry one day, didn't know anything. I just took a job at some random firm, like I'm going to start selling houses. And I didn't realize that actually you had to like build a business. Like even as an agent, it was really hard to get started. It was funny. I was so broke when I got started. My friend and I had to split the cost of peanut butter and bread so we could eat for that week. So like when I say I really didn't, I started very low. Like I started very low. But that's what I was doing before, was I just had that desire. And then one day I said, you know what, screw it. Like I can go back to school. And but I might not be able to always have this time when I'm in my late teens and early 20s where I can build something. And that's what I did.
Yeah, definitely. I see this pattern, especially in the US a lot, that like you guys are like really driven, and it's like, because here in Europe, people take more traditional roads. It's also because school is free. Everyone goes the same way, but you guys are like so passionate and just like jump into it. And that's like, I love it. And was the ultimate goal to become an entrepreneur and maybe like have your own real estate firm, or did you just like go with real estate without any plan, just wanted to do this?
No, it was a bit of both, honestly. Like the long-term goal of what I ended up wanting to accomplish, I always had a vision for, but that changes when you're executing. I did always want to be an entrepreneur, right? My father was an entrepreneur, and other people in my family historically had been entrepreneurs. And so growing up, I was in an environment in which the conversation was not as much, do you get a job? And then that's how you provide for your family. The conversation was around, how do you want to work? How do you want to live? What types of opportunity and output do you want to have in the world? Maybe that's through a traditional route in academia or education or a job, but maybe it's not. And so that the open-mindedness early on that maybe there's more than one route was instilled in me. And so early on, I knew that I wanted to be entrepreneurial. I'm self-declared unemployable. I have a really hard time working candidly just for other people, not because I'm an ass or I'm abrasive, but just because I find inefficiencies that I really want to fix. And I have a hard time being in an environment when I can't fix them. You know, someone will say, hey, shut up and do your job. I'm like, but I don't want to do just this. I want to do this too. And that's, you know, very hard when you're working for someone else. So I did always know that I would be a business owner. I would be an entrepreneur. And I really wanted to do great things. But going back to the real estate industry, I knew I had that passion. And I also knew I loved real estate. And I bet somewhere in the middle, there was an opportunity. And that's kind of where I took it. And so, you know, over an expanse of years, you know, I grew that business significantly. And, but when I first got started, it was more of kind of step one and step two, right? My first step was I had to be able to understand the environment I was working in. When I first sat down, I remember I was at this company and I sit down at this desk and there's like this box of old binders of just paper. I mean, stacked as tall as you can see. And the owner of this firm had said, this is everyone who's called into our firm in the last, you know, 6 months, 12 months, year, 2 years, 3 years, that may or may not be interested in buying a house. You need to call them back and ask if they want to buy a house, which is a horrible way, by the way, to do any type of sales. Like, hey, Peter, you want to buy a house? You're like, what the hell? Like, no, like the chances of that actually hitting where you're like, yes, is so low. But I didn't know. And so, but this is so funny. This is how just inexperienced I was. I pick up the phone. The first person I call, and this is like 2 years, 3 years later, was like, yeah, I'm ready to buy a house right now. First person. I'm like, oh my gosh. They go, okay, I'm looking at this house. It was, 123 Main Street or whatever the address was. And he says, how much is it? And I'm sitting there on the phone and I don't even know how to log into my system to check the price. So I'm like, I'll call you back. So I call him back. I figure out how I, run and get somebody and tell me how to log into this thing. I've got, a hot lead and I log in and then I call him back. And I said, oh, it's this much. And he goes, he says, great. How long has it been on the market? And I was like, I'll call you back. Anyway, long story short, that did not go anywhere, obviously, because after a while he just stopped picking up my calls. But to say I had like this fully blown plan, and a lot of it was kind of ready, fire, aim, right? Like I know I want to do these things kind of in the future, and I'm just going to work my feet and chop wood and carry water kind of in this space as I work towards that. And that was an example of things were a little chaotic when I got started.
Nice, love it. But yeah, looking back, it's really paid dividends, right? Like your passion and everything, and like how then you exited your first company. And yeah, before we move on, I want to ask you, what do you think your unique skill is that has helped you become so successful?
That's a really good question.
Your passion?
Yeah, I mean, but a lot of people have passion. I think it's hard to do self-analysis, and so this may or may not hit correctly, but I think the one thing that I do know that I've been doing consistently that I believe is a trait of people who are just successful is just be really unkillable. Like I know what it's like to go through just absolute turmoil, like where the depths of the pain that you're experiencing as you're working towards something greater is impossible to describe with words because it's so deep, you don't even have a word for it, right? Like years of turmoil and just absolute chaos, and just not dying in that. And I think that's something that I don't know where that comes from, to be totally honest, but I just really, really give a shit about whatever is I'm working towards. And that means that if I have to take it minute by minute or hour by hour or day by day, and in those short expanses of time, I'm willing to do that. And I'm willing to have extreme levels of just torturous discomfort for a long period of time because I believe enough in what I'm building and I believe enough in my ability to get there. That's really, that's it. Like there's plenty of people who are not as passionate, but have built great businesses. There are plenty of people who are more passionate, wildly passionate, evangelical, that haven't. And I think the one character trait that brings any successful person to that level of success, or to a level of success, is just being unkillable, like willing to sacrifice everything that's comfortable now, not even for something later, but for the hope and for the belief that something will come later. Because oftentimes that doesn't materialize for decades, right?
Yeah, I like that we already started talking about this mindset aspect of entrepreneurship. In the beginning of this podcast, you already mentioned how you always had this spirit that you wanted to be your own boss. Was that the main motivation for founding your own company, Stewart Residentials? Were there any other motives behind that? And how do you remember your starts as a founder?
I mean, that was it. Was a lot of businesses, especially service-based businesses, are not started by people who want to start companies. They're started by people that do work and they get a lot of work. And so then they hire an assistant. And then now they can take on more work. And oh no, I need someone to do the lower levels of work, right? I don't want to take $10,000, or I'm only going to take $10,000 contracts. $500 contracts I can pay this person to do. And then over a period of time, now maybe they've got a team of 20 people. And so a lot of service-based businesses, especially when you look in real estate, insurance, and even creative businesses, not what you do necessarily with the Webflow consultancy, but I'm sure you know designers where they've got a small team of people and they never wanted to be a business owner. They just happened to be taking on more work, right? And you see that everywhere, all over the world. So my thought process was, if I could enter the real estate industry as a worker, but with the understanding that I'm going to work my way through the industry up to understand what my later employees will be going through, that's the only way to build a successful business, I believe, in any industry, is you have to know it intimately. We all know the statistic that the vast majority of startups fail. Depending on the country that you're in, it could be 80%, 90%, but it's a lot. And a lot of that, I think, is because founders see an idea and they chase after an idea without any understanding or knowledge of what they're actually chasing, right? It's kind of like a car with the male person, or a dog with the male person, which is, oftentimes, this dog will be chasing after that male person, but then when they finally get there, they don't know what to do, right? And that's kind of with the startup environment. So my thought process was, to your point, Flo, of if I could understand the industry, I know that I want to build something big. And Stewart Residential was an accumulation of those years of effort, bringing in other agents, trying to provide top quality service. But then also something that I had learned through that was build something that one day you'll exit. That exit, at full disclosure, like I totally screwed that up. Like knowing what I know now, like I got a fraction of what I should have gotten. I structured the deal incorrectly. There was a lot of mistakes I made there, but that's how you learn, right? And now I know, moving into other ventures, like, okay, now I know what not to do in order to maximize the return on my investment of those many years of hard work.
If you don't mind, I want to dive deeper into the exit you just mentioned. So was that like your goal from the beginning to make some money and then exit and do something else? Was that like something that came to you later? And how was, like, in your mind, this decision? Was it hard to take? Because a lot of time, obviously, founders get attached to their businesses, and it's more of an emotional than a business decision to exit?
Well, kind of. I mean, I knew that I would want to probably exit one day, but for me, it wasn't a decision like, oh, I'm going to build towards an exit. It actually happened because of a lot of negatives, right? So I was making quite a bit of money. I was 25. I was living in this super fancy place and had all the fancy, you know, stuff that you get when you have money. And I hated it, right? And I say that not to be like, oh, look at me, but to be an example of the trappings of success, to where if the only thing that you're looking for is financial gain, then you're going to be so poor that the only thing you have is cash. And that was my situation. Was, I was exhausted. There was one day I worked 43 consecutive 20-hour days, and I passed out in my kitchen bringing in groceries because I was so tired. I had worked literally every single day for 6 and 7 and 8 years. Over holidays, over Christmas, I was negotiating a deal 2 hours before I got married, right? So like, I'm talking incredible amounts of work. And what had happened is I had started to see these things in my life of like, I'm earning money in the name of supporting my family, but I can't spend time with my family. And then the money's going back into the business to earn more. So I can't actually use what I had earned, on top of being exhausted, on top of just being the incredible fluctuations in earning opportunity, because that industry fluctuates a lot, as you know. And so all these things came together where one day I was like, you know what? This is not who I want to be or how I want to earn for the remainder of my life. And that honestly was what really inspired the first conversations of, I'd like to get out of this thing. Like I'm ready. I've done it. I built a big business. I know I can do it. I learned a lot, but I reached a point where, in order to get my business to that next level, which was that 9-figure mark, so going from 8 figures to 9 figures, the amount of effort it would take to do that was more than I was willing to put in, because the reward to me wasn't worth it. Because I looked around and there were some of my friends that were doing 9 and 10 figures. And I looked around and thought, well, this person's been divorced 3 or 4 times. This person never sees her kids. This person is always exhausted. No judgment, but that was not the life that I had wanted. I didn't want to go through multiple marriages. I didn't want to be absent from my children. I didn't want to have my income fluctuate based on other people's emotional situations. I wanted something constant. I didn't want to have to choose between my earning potential and going on vacation and headspace. And those were all sacrifices that I wasn't willing to continue making, which is why I decided, you know what, I'm ready to move out. And that honestly, like, I wish it was some sexy story about like, yeah, things were so great. And like, yeah, there was money, but that was it. It just wasn't worth it to me. And that's what inspired that thought process of like, you know what, this isn't worth it. The effort required isn't something I wanted to pursue anymore. And then, a few months later, I started talking to people about who would want to take this thing over. So it happened pretty quickly.
Yeah, Evan, honestly, thank you for being so upfront and open talking about this. Obviously, the exit is that point in company storyline everybody remembers, but there are other things that happen along the way. One of them for Stewart Residential, if I'm not mistaken, was a merger.
Well, we had merged. Yeah, we went through a few different changes. So you're thinking of the Ruckert Stewart merge probably. So exactly. I had started on my own. I started building something. There was somebody else in my network who had started building something. We came together. It wasn't as much of, I guess it was a merge, but it was more just like, hey, we're going to take these two things that are growing in lots of overlap, and we're going to bring it together under one roof and then grow that. And then, like a lot of businesses dissolve because of business partner issues. My business partner and I didn't see eye to eye on how we wanted to continue growing the business or take care of our people. And so then we unmerged and then went back to Stewart Residential. So that brand kind of carried through a few evolutions, but ultimately ended on Stewart Residential.
I see. Yeah, for us, we're not that familiar with this industry, but of course, there are obviously some lessons that you took with you now in this more tech startup world. Could you share some with us? What do you think that are maybe some of your competitive advantages because of your history?
That's a good question, actually. I think one of the things that I had learned is whether or not you're familiar with the real estate industry, you can be familiar with service-based industries because it's very similar. That's where that's what you're in, right? Arguably, is that part of your deliverable is somebody doing a service, not just like writing software and it just does its own thing. It's just hanging out there. People, you don't really have to touch it. Yeah, you do bugs and stuff, but it's different. Part of the deliverable is actually working for a client's need, doing something. Real estate's the same way. It's just instead of designing a Webflow site, you're working on property. Instead of working through an invoice number, you're working through portfolio numbers, managing someone's asset. It's structurally quite similar, fundamentally. So what I had learned is, okay, service-based industries are inherently very hard to scale because the amount of people power it takes to actually grow is astronomical. And so the biggest thing that I had learned was how to grow something that's inherently very hard to grow. And so then when you apply those same tactics that worked over there to from real estate into what we're doing now with Basewell, like a relational approach, how do we build relationships? How do we create a structured sales team that's not like crazy and slimy and pushy, right? Everyone hates to be sold to by people that don't know what they're doing and don't really care about your best interests. Like, how do we actually structure sales environments? How do we build relationships? How do we market in a relational over transactional way? How do we build something that people had wanted by understanding what they want, by listening to them? All of those things that worked well in that environment previously that was so hard to scale work much, much better in an environment that's much easier to scale. Because if I was serving, 30 people or 50 people as clients in my real estate business, that would require a small team. But 30 or 50 people is like nothing in software. I mean, it's literally nothing in software, right? And so the scalability there, that factor is something I'm really excited about. We've seen great momentum with that so far, and I'm excited to capitalize on that in the future.
And looking back to the real estate time and now comparing it to Basewell, that you are probably familiar with like lean methodology approach since now you work in tech. Is that like some sort of lean methodology in real estate as well, and like building MVPs before you go full in?
Yeah, yes, but it's different. So, the lean methodology in tech essentially is only do the necessary. Don't bloat your business with people. Don't bloat your expenses with stupid things that don't return. That's how it was in real estate for me, because I didn't have any investment. I didn't have any money, so I had to figure it out. And so the lean methodology back then was building relationships and taking the time out of your day to actually meet people and listen to them. It was not wasting money on marketing. It was spending time with people to learn about their needs. And then, like, if I was going to spend money, maybe we'd have a conversation. We'd sat down and you talked about like, oh, I am really interested in this book. My marketing budget when I was really early might be to say thank you for your time and then send you that book that you had talked about. Just little things to show like I hear you and I see you. And people want to be seen and heard and acknowledged and known. And that lean methodology back then was how it was applied, right? Where every time I do something, it has to be purposeful. If it's a dollar going out, it needs to bring dollars going in at some form. It doesn't mean that every relationship has to be monetized, because the first statement was purposeful. Sometimes I meet with people with no expectation of doing business other than to build a strong relationship with someone who I like, because those relationships will bring other similar relationships, like attracts like through referrals. So in real estate, that's how we use that lean methodology in Basewell, and what we're building here in tech. It's a similar understanding of when a dollar goes out, it has to bring money back in, right? I've talked a lot about this lately this year about stewardship. The tech markets are going crazy right now. I believe one of the reasons that the tech markets are going wild is because founders were not being good stewards of their business, stewards of their investment. Investors, a lot of them weren't being good stewards of their investors' capital. And so there's a cycle of improper stewardship that created that bloated startup, to where now, companies are slashing headcounts and they're slashing marketing. And yeah, there's a lot of other nuance and factors and stuff. But the reality is, if you take everything with a heart of stewardship and the approach of having everything be purposeful, I'm going to hire this person, not because I just want more people to show some type of headcount growth, but because this person has a very specific and diligent job to do and value to add to the organization. When we do marketing, we're not just going to do marketing just to say, oh yeah, we're doing all this, point and shoot marketing, I hope something comes back. but we're working off of an incredible level of data that allows us to target people's pain points and then address it through a marketing approach, right? That's that lean startup that very much it's very applicable from what we did previously to how we're operating now.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up about like tech startups blowing up and like investor throwing in absurd amount of money, since I really want to touch in depth about this like later on. But after exiting your company, you then work as an executive advisor for startup founders, right? In the real estate. And did you notice like any pattern like real estate startup founders are making?
Similar to really any founder, right? It's just people that they're trying things and they're figuring it out. But the biggest thing that I found across the people that we had worked with was that there's there's just so much unnecessary bloat, like going back to what we just talked about, of people not thinking through the importance of a decision and the purpose of a decision and the stewardship of that decision, and then just executing on it because they saw maybe a competitor doing it, right? Like, oh, this competitor just did this great thing, now we need to do that. And there's no rhyme or reason. It's just because I'm seeing it be done. And I think when you have founders that are especially first-time founders, but founders that lack confidence in their vision and their mission, it's a confident thing to say, I can see that our biggest competitor is doing that. I'm choosing not to follow in their footsteps because I have a vision over here and I believe in this. That's a confident decision. It's a little bit of an audacious decision that a lot of founders, I think, across the board in any industry are just scared to make, because it means you have to have a little bit of tenacity to say, I'm going to do something totally contrary and totally different. To your point, for those listening, when I exited my real estate company and left real estate, Brittany and I, my wife and I, did some executive consulting for a few years. And I think consulting is a great segue, actually, just a time to kind of do things on your own terms, work with other people, and identify other problems in the market and get other perspectives on the same problems. And so, Peter, to your point, I think that's what you were referencing, is kind of that transition where it took some time to work with other founders in some different markets and really get my hands back into the startup scene, and find new problems to address with other great teams throughout the United States and Canada.
And now looking back to like going over consultancy, exiting first your business, like would you do anything different if you were starting over?
I would do a lot different. Yeah.
What advice would you give yourself right now if you were like 22 again?
I would go straight into tech, honestly. Okay. Like, okay, the two biggest things that stick out, because there's a lot. Do I regret? No. But would I do things differently? Yeah, absolutely. Because you could be more efficient, more profitable, better. The two things I would do differently if I was boot back to, well, technically I dropped out at 19, but 19, 20, 21, 22, was I would work for a tech startup first, because a lot of my early years were figuring shit out that other people had already figured out, but I didn't have a lot of people that I could lean into and learn from. I kind of in that world. I mean, I had, people in my family who had run businesses and whatnot, but no one had ever started a real estate venture. So the nuances of that company were different than the advice I could get previously. And there was a lot of time where I was just wandering in the dark, feeling around, trying to find something. And then I'd grab something and then it would be like a bomb and explode. And I'd go, okay, don't do that. And then I'd go over here. Years of just trial and error. So the first thing is I would work for another startup and be in an environment where I could create impact, but the weight of learning how to figure stuff out would not be on my shoulders all the time. The second thing I would do is screw the real estate, screw working as the consultant, screw all that. I would go straight into tech. I think that technology is a net positive for all of humanity. And I really, really, really believe that the opportunities you can create leveraged with technology and human input is far beyond anything you could do without technology. And so starting in a lower tech field, like in my instance, that type of service-based industry, it's probably not something that I would have done knowing what I know now. But, again, it's hard to go back and say, because so much of how I operate now was through the trial and error of doing something with my own two hands that wasn't coding until recently, right? And so having that other perspective of our problem, working with people, there's a lot of insight that happened through that experience that I certainly don't regret. So would I do things differently? Yeah, sure. But very specifically, do I regret? Absolutely not, because I'm very grateful for the trial and error that we went through to get here.
Yeah, definitely advice to remember. And talking about technology, talking about service-based industry, we want to move over to Basewell. Can you tell us what Basewell was and what it is today?
Sure. Yeah, Basewell is we're a better training platform for startups, right? So Basewell is one simple location for startups to create training content, assign that to people anywhere in the world, and then measure the impact of that content. We've got a great analytics platform to know how information is being interpreted and then retained and then applied across your workforce. And what it was funny because Peter, you mentioned the consultancy. It was during that time that we actually discovered this huge gap in the market, which is a lot of companies, even pre-COVID, had some form of their workforce that was maybe hybrid or virtual or remote, or even if they were in person, perhaps that company was still using tools to distribute information virtually to their team. And what we had found was really two things. The first is that the tools that were used were highly inefficient. It was like glorified, boring YouTube, right? Where you'd click a video and it'd be in a really terrible UI and it just looked like crap and it felt like crap. But it didn't tell the managers or the founders anything other than like, Evan watched this video, or maybe Evan took a quiz and got a good score. But that creates false positives, because if you see that I got a 100 on my quiz in this video, you're going to assume that I know it, when in reality, I might just be really good at moving through crappy content, right? And so there's this world of false positives. If you look at any type of given study, there's about $398 billion throughout the world right now that's wasted just through undertrained and disengaged employees, because tools like this don't properly map how information is retained, interpreted, and applied. And so we saw that first problem with the tooling. And then the second is we also noticed there was a huge gap for startups, companies that didn't have 10,000 people. Because a lot of these tools were integrated into much larger ecosystems like maybe Salesforce, which really are built for much larger organizations. So not only is there a problem with the tools, but the tools aren't even built for the companies that most need them. And that's really where we came into the picture. Flo, you'd mentioned at the beginning kind of where we started and where we're at. At the beginning of this year, when we launched the first version of our platform, we started solely leaning into the analytics, right? The thought process was, hey, we'll plug into the technology your company's using. We'll sync it together. We'll collect data here and collect data here, and then we'll provide relevant insights so you can see, without using any new tool, you can see how the information you're distributing throughout your workforce is affecting outcomes positively or negatively, affecting culture, affecting people, which is a good thesis. But the problem is that when you're at the whim of getting data from pre-existing tools, the data you get is fractured, because Notion isn't going to give us everything. And your CRM isn't going to give us everything. So we're working with fragmented data. So we discovered about halfway through this year, we just have to build the entire thing and virtually integrate the training and the distribution aspects of a training center into our platform. So that's where we are today, and how we got to the thesis as one vertically integrated solution, one single source of truth. Yeah, and it's really, really been a fun project so far.
For us, it's always interesting to pick brains of our hosts. And I just want to talk about the thing that you mentioned: when new data, new information are coming in, you get new insights to the consumers, to the market. How do you manage these decisions? When is the right time to add a feature or even pivot a bit?
For sure. Well, it's important to note that we didn't start Basewell again because we're like found this idea and we wanted to go and chase it. We started Basewell, and I say we because my wife and I founded this company. We've worked together for many years. And so if I'm referencing we, by the way, it's not me and some like ethereal third person. It's my wife and I. But we started this company because we got so pissed off with the lack of solutions and the problem with the tools that we just said, like, screw it, we're going to build our own. And so our experience with this market has allowed us to build a roadmap around current options. So I've been a customer for almost all of our competitors because I've been trying to find a solution like this for years, which means I know where they're screwing up. I also know what customers and companies are on our competitors because I worked with them. That means that we can build Basewell to be a perfect, well, I dare I say perfect, but to be a very, very, very strong solution against even the current market landscape because we have experience with the current market landscape. And so to your point, to answer your question, I know that was kind of a long run around a short walk type of answer, but to actually answer the question, the first is that we have experience with the market. So we have a defined roadmap based on features that we know are necessary. They're necessary, and we also know they're not being answered, and they're not going to be answered by current options for a long time. So it gives us a good window of time to capture that market. And then the second is going back to the fundamental aspect we talked about earlier of just talking to people, right? So we have, oh my gosh, I'm trying to think of a number. We've had a lot of conversations with founders just saying, hey, you know, what's important to you and to your company, right? How are your teams working? What's the biggest hiccup here? Well, you have a situation where you've just hired somebody new. What metrics or tools do you use to know that they're good at their job, right? The most common answer is they either succeed or fail at their job, right? So it's do or die. It's, hey, I know that you're doing a good job because you're doing a good job, period. Or you failed at your job, right? That's the end goal. So our thoughts, thesis and thought process is knowing that information, knowing this roadmap, let's map the middle. Like, what if you had insight into a person's ability to succeed well before they ultimately succeed or fail? And then what if you had data points to know exactly where they're starting to trend off so you could find it and fix it immediately in real time before that negative trend impacted your bottom line, right? Those types of theses develop a certain type of roadmap that we're playing on today, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, could you expand a bit on this process of validating your idea and finding the right product market fit? Did you have like this process mapped out before, or kind of just went with the flow as the insights were coming in?
A little bit of both. Because we had done some consultancy. I'd been a business owner for a while. We had relationships to other businesses of various sizes that we could leverage to get early feedback. So I had an immediate network of people in the United States and Canada that could use our platform and give feedback in various industries. So early on, we had a small group of people where we could get some diverse, honest feedback. Like, you know, someone could call me and go, this is terrible. I hate this. I go, great. That's good to know, versus this is really great. We had that early network early on, but we also strategically have built relationships to where this product is so important to the market. I mean, we have had just since the beginning of this month, like hundreds of companies have joined our waitlist just since the first of this month, on top of the hundreds of companies previously, on top of the thousands, tens of thousands of seats that we've already had. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that to say we haven't actually started really marketing yet, but just through some SEO optimization, just through relationships and building a product that we know people want, a lot of people have been reaching out saying that they're ready for this type of solution. So the early thesis of we experienced this problem, therefore other people probably have this problem, therefore a current option in the market isn't really solving it, so we must have an opportunity. That line of thinking so far has been quite validated, if that answered your first question. To your point on the pivot, when we had pivoted into that full stack, that came from the thought process. I don't want people to use my product. I want people to marry my product, right? A marriage is a long-term vested mutual commitment, which is it's something that happens daily, or at the very least consistently. It's a vested commitment, which means that there's a high probability you'll stay with us, even if other options are in the market, right? So that type of mindset, I would start talking to people. Well, how often are you using the product? Oh, wait, you're only using it twice a month? Well, what specifically is keeping you from using it more? Is there something else that's distracting? So digging into that data is how we found the need for one solution, because people kept going away from our analytics engine to get back into maybe Notion or CRM or some other tool to actually map this information. Even though we had the data, they were trying to push the data elsewhere because having multiple tools was just kind of a pain in the ass, and they didn't want that. So it was through those conversations that we had recognized, okay, this pivot to this next version of the product is a better solution for our customers, and it's better for us because that means we own more data, which means we can do more with it.
Yeah, definitely talking with potential customers and also current customers, I think the most like the crucial thing you can do to succeed in the long run. But what I see like often is like people get super excited about the idea And also the product, well, it's free, but once you start charging for it, they just run away.
Yeah.
How did you go about the pricing strategy?
Well, pricing strategy right now is we haven't released the pricing strategy publicly, but I will say that it has been validated. And the way that we have it structured right now is a certain amount of trainees. So if you're a founder, you're bringing in employees that are training, they're called a trainee. You can have a certain amount of trainees and a certain amount of information for free. And so how we've developed the pricing strategy is we're just watching at what level the tool goes from a nice to have to a must have. It's a certain level of content. It's a certain level of adoption across a company. And then whatever that level is, just a hair before it is where our pricing tier starts, right? Because we want to make sure, like, look, Basewell's not for everybody. It's not. And I only want companies on Basewell who are going to be committed to empowering their team members through a better tool to distribute information. If you don't give a shit about your people, I don't want you on my platform. It's just that plain and simple, because my platform isn't built for you. Not that your way is right or your way is wrong. It's just different. And so by creating that type of a tier, what we've done is we've said, okay, if you're using the platform enough and continuously for it to be valuable, then right when it becomes that essential must have, that's when we're going to ask, hey, as you're adding more people, as you're adding lots of content, we'd like for you to start paying. But we've got a very fair subscription policy that models Slack's billing policy. So you only pay for what you use. It's no long-term contracts or anything like that. I believe very much in fair billing. And so far, we've gotten really good feedback on it. So I hope for that to continue.
Yeah, nice. Got it. And you also mentioned that basically Basewell is you and your wife, right? You're building together.
Well, we are building together. Our team is 3 right now. So it's myself and my wife, and then we've got an incredible engineer.
Okay, got it. And like, what's the family dynamics now? That like, what's the startup work like when you're building a startup with your wife?
Well, startup is its own marriage in and of itself. It's just us two are married to this problem in addition to each other. Brittany and I have worked together for years. I mean, a long time. We've been together almost a decade. We've been married for about half that time. And we've been working together for a good portion of that time. And so our flow as a couple, what we really know more than anything is taking on big projects together and accomplishing it together, right? I'm very entrepreneurial. I'm very good at defining a vision and then executing on that large scale vision. I'm also technical, so I can do front end development and design. Brittany she fills in those gaps, right? So she is technical as it relates to organizational structure. She's incredibly good at ops. She's really good at solving complex problems on the logic standpoint. And her experience is on the back end of startups, right? She's built a lot of operations that have scaled and seen what scales, seen what breaks within quickly growing organizations. And so our experience together, obviously it really fits quite well. And then the only thing we were really missing is like an incredibly talented, really strong back-end engineer who is we have now, which is fantastic. So the 3 of us together, we've got really all bases covered, and it's been we've been shipping exceptionally quickly, which I'm quite proud of, honestly. So
Nice. And yeah, you said that you're launching in 10 days, actually, right?
Yeah, we're so that this new version that we've been talking about at Basewell, that
Right.
we're launching that to current customers and onboarding our first cohorts here at the end of this month, well, right before Christmas. And so yeah, we're excited about that. It's just a few days away.
All right. And since like we have a lot of founders listening to our podcast, yeah, give our listeners a quick pitch, like 1-minute pitch, why they should be ready in 10 days to join Basewell.
They should be ready to. Absolutely. Well, we're the only platform in the world that's one tool to actually create, assign, and then measure content at scale for a distributed workforce. We have a beautiful Notion-like block-based editor that's designed specifically to mimic tools that you already use, so you don't have to learn anything new. Also, we're built for speed. We deploy on the Vercel ecosystem. Our first contentful paint is under 1 second. So we're the only training platform in the world for you to go from a blank screen to actually having your content loaded in less than a millisecond, or excuse me, in less than 1 second. I wish it was less than a millisecond, in less than 1 second. And last but not least, we're also built from a UI standpoint. Remember, we were consumers before we engineered the product. So we're built specifically to be as simple as possible for the consumer experience. So to give you an example, Peter, I was testing our category flow of how you actually create and create layers of content, different subjects and lessons and whatnot. And I went from a blank screen to having a draft of a category, and then nested subjects and nested lessons where we had about 9 throughout the entire thing. I did it in 9 seconds of just being able to create a draft, click, create a draft, click. So our flow is very much built to keep pace with a fast startup world, as opposed to our most relevant competitor where their average load time on screen is 28 seconds. So if you care about supporting your people and you care about one way to distribute content and to know how it's being interpreted, retained, and applied, you should give Basewell a try. Honestly, I think it'd be a great tool for your company.
Nice. That was super smooth. I'm full.
Awesome.
Yeah. And now I want to talk about the newsletter you're running. And first question, since you said that you're having 16 hours work days, like when do you do the newsletter?
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because I actually just a few days ago sent a letter to my subscribers saying I'm going to be sending them a little more infrequently for that reason. So it's funny you mentioned that because sometimes you take on a little more than there's a saying we have here in the States. I'm not sure if you have it in Slovenia, which is like your eyes are bigger than your stomach. You know, you get that full plate of food and you're like, I'm ready to eat the entire thing. You eat like half of it and you're like, dang. Well, I do this. Yeah, exactly. Well, I do the same thing sometimes. And so, but to me, writing is just a different articulation of thought. And I like to think a lot. In fact, one of the things I think founders could do to better optimize their process as a founder is to be quiet more, to think more, and then also to write more. And so what would happen for me is I would be thinking, and I would be thinking through problems that I'd see in the market, or I'd be thinking through stories, and I'd want to articulate that thought in a way, not just for other people, but for me to better understand my thought process. And that's how the newsletter got started, was I started noticing trends and writing it down and thinking, wait, I think other people would want to read this. And so I did take a pause on that. I'm publishing less frequently right now, only because like there's only so much time in the day. But I'm definitely continuing publishing posts in the future. I've got one that I just posted earlier today actually about the fear and on Twitter, a thread about the fear of artificial intelligence that I think I'll probably turn into a much more long form kind of thought process. But my thesis on that moving forward is really just sending out information when it's robust enough to be digested in a really big metaphorical meal of information, right? I kind of went through the newsletter on having really big analytical posts and then kind of smaller, more playful things that were more of our thought process, just my thought process. And I think I like that really big long form version that's almost like an essay as opposed to a quick newsletter. So I've been experimenting with it. I'll play around. I've got some ideas in 2023 I'm going to execute on. And because look, when I'm not working on Basewell, that's kind of how that's like an outlet, right? So it's been a fun little experiment so far.
Yeah, I saw your Twitter thread, and AI, right, is a hot topic.
Yeah, it's really hot
right last days. Did you have the chance to try ChatGPT?
I did. Yeah, I've tried it for a few different use cases, and it's super interesting. Super interesting. I'll be curious to see. There's a story that's broke over the weekend that scientists in the United States may have also successfully done a nuclear fusion, which would be an incredible amount of power for like clean energy. It'll actually output more energy than it takes to run it, which for all intents and purposes is kind of the holy grail. And so it's kind of funny because ChatGPT and just the artificial intelligence work in general, and this constant barrage and possibility of infinite clean energy used to be things that were so far on the horizon, like we didn't even expect that they would happen. And then they both kind of happened in like a month and became very real very quickly. And so I'm super optimistic about the future, especially when it relates to those types of tools. And I bring the fusion conversation in because they both go hand in hand as far as like major progressions that happened very quickly. Even though I know, Peter, you're referencing AI specifically, I'm a techno optimist. I think that human potential is benefited when technology is added to the mix.
Yeah, I am as well. I mean, I look super optimistic in the future. Especially like, I think AI will, if we talk about AI, right, it will help us embrace to be better in every aspect, I think. You would just have to learn how to use it.
Yeah, right. It's just like anything, the thread I referenced earlier was the people who are saying like, this is scary and this is bad. All throughout history, people have been saying the same thing. right? If you look all the way back, I mean, you had ancient philosophers and scholars that had a fear of books, saying that it would cause people to rely not on their memory, but on the written word. You had, obviously, we know recent fears about Wi-Fi and cell phones and the abundance of information. When trains were in the United States, you had some scientific experts that thought that people would melt, that the human body wasn't allowed to go over 50 miles an hour, right? CNN wrote an article talking about how email is making people more stupid than those who would smoke pot on a daily basis. There's always this negativity and thesis around technology because human nature is to be scared of the thing in which we rely on but have no control over. So it makes sense. But my thought process is, if you're going to be working in a world in which these technologies will become part of your daily life, perhaps it's more constructive to the conversation to figure out how you can adjust and contribute to the progression of that technology in a way that you'd like to see it grow, as opposed to just shutting down the dialogue and sticking your head in the sand. Like that's not super productive.
Yeah, definitely agree. I 100% agree with you on that.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, since you've been writing a lot and you've been writing your newsletter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think writing is in any field you work, I think writing is one of the best skills you can have as a founder.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think writing impacts your life in general now that you write regularly? Like how you think, how do you approach problems?
For sure. I've always written. I mean, my mother was an English major, and so growing up, it was really important. She had taught the importance of writing well, speaking well, and just generally being able to communicate in efficient ways. And so I've always been writing. The biggest difference now, honestly, is just now I'm writing in public. But it's kind of this dilemma because I write. I've been writing things that other people enjoy reading, but to be honest, I don't write for other people. I write for myself and for my train of thought. And so the only thing that's really changed is I've been more public about things that I'm noticing and writing in a way where it's a little more of like a public friendly article and a little less of like an internal brainstorm. But B is I've also been more diligent about writing more often, because I found that the more I write about problems I'm finding, because it inspires pulling in research and other articles and validating my own thoughts, maybe challenging my own thoughts. The more I do that, I do that more when I write, as opposed to just having an idea, looking it up, having an answer, and then moving on. And I've really enjoyed that internal challenge of, okay, I believe something, but why do I believe what I believe? Is there anyone else who believes differently? Why do they believe that? And then going down those rabbit holes to build an actual kind of well-rounded argument is something that I've been enjoying. And that whole thought process is one that I've really leaned into over the last couple of months.
The stories and the takes you shared with us today were really, really valuable. So I kind of want to challenge you a bit with this question.
Sure.
What's the best advice you've ever heard, and how did you implement it?
Well, the best advice I ever heard was, I actually heard recently, and I wish I heard it earlier. So I implemented it by accident, but moving forward, I don't know who said it, but it was a quote, which is that the only mistake in your 20s is inaction. Everything else is just trial and error. And the reason why I say that is because I'm 30 in 2023, so I'm still in my 20s technically, but I have not done anything for over 10 years except work. Literally, that's it. Like I don't go out and party. I've never I'm not a fun guy to go and like hang out with, because I don't know how to do those fun guy things, So I wish I was I wish I could like turn up at a party, but that's just not. I hadn't been doing that, and the reason why I say that is during that time, I constantly have this fear, still to this day, have this fear that I'm behind, that I need to do more, that I'm not moving fast enough, that something has to get done, and then also that some of these errors that I had, like candidly screwing up that first exit, right? Getting a much lower buyout than I could have gotten elsewhere because I was moving in with incorrect advice. Like thinking, wow, I could have done things differently, and did that screw up a later opportunity? And Peter, to your point, like I started in real estate, I didn't start in tech. Like I've had to start from the ground up all over again in technology, But the only mistake in your 20s is inaction. Anything else is just trial and error. I was inadvertently working that way before I knew the quote. And now that I know the quote, I think to anyone that's listening, especially if you're in your 20s, like constantly being willing to fail right now is more important than ever, because this is like a freebie zone of time to where you can screw up pretty dramatically, and you have enough time later in your life to fix it, figure it out, and then also win. I've never been older than I am right now, but I know a lot of people that are. And I hear, especially as people get older, that fear of running out of time just grows dramatically, specifically because they start to think back, at least the conversation that I've had, they start to think back on how they acted earlier in their life, and then start to think, oh no, the opportunity cost of that at that time is no longer something that I'd align with, right? Like I chose to go out and do these things instead of these things, but now with the knowledge I have, I really wish I would have done, the latter segment. The only mistake in your 20s is inaction. Everything else is just trial and error, I think is something I've been chewing on and living with a lot over the last couple of months, and is definitely, I think, some really, really strong advice.
Perfect. This really resonates with me. So thanks for sharing. And
Sure.
Before we let you go, we always have a series of 5 rapid fire questions for our guests. So let's start with, what's your favorite hobby?
I really love rock climbing and being outdoors and adventurous.
Okay. Favorite book?
2, Build by Tony Fadell and Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink.
Favorite podcast?
I really like the Freakonomics podcast a lot. Different perspectives on and really deep dives into everyday problems. What's
your favorite productivity tool?
I love one of my favorites actually is Cron, the Cron calendar. I love Cron. I use it all the time, but the second would be, or not second, the other one would definitely be Threads. The Slack alternative, Threads, is far and beyond my absolute most delightful productivity tool I use every day.
And most used app on your phone?
Probably outside of the actual like texting, Threads. Honestly, I'm on that all the time, because that's how our team communicates.
I see. Evan, it was great having you. You've been an amazing guest. All the best with the upcoming launch, and hope to chat with you again soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Delighted to be here, and I certainly appreciate the time. It's a great conversation.
Yeah, also from my side, love talking with you. Really great insights.
For sure. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.